Hello and welcome to Art and Self. I'm Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator, the Curated Connections Library, and the Art and Self Connection Circle. This is a podcast where we experience the range and depth of what it means to be human, seen through our connections and conversations about works of art. These art conversations are here to show you that art is here for you as a catalyst, a challenger, a coach, and a comfort. Before we get started, take a moment to fill up your lungs with a deep breath. Connect with your body and your mind and your spirit, and get ready to discover what art has to show you. All right, I am so excited to welcome Chris Bonnello to the podcast. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started and looking at the art, can you introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Yeah, my name's Chris Bonnello. I am an autistic advocate and former teacher, also a speaker, blogger, author, and a bunch of other things. Used to be a teacher in primary education and specialist education as well, autism specific. And these days I do a lot of teacher training as well as writing stuff on the internet and publishing books.
Excellent. Most of my audience is teachers. So that is great that you, the podcast used to be just for art teachers. And so now it's kind of for everyone, but everybody that, was my listeners before they're still around are mostly art teachers. So that's great. And you run the Facebook page, Autistic Not Weird?
Oh yeah, probably should have mentioned that. Yes.
Yeah.
It's Not Weird is a website and a Facebook page, which is set up to tell people about autism from both my personal perspective and my professional perspective. And yeah, it's gone a little bit well.
Yeah.
Nearly 8 years on. The Facebook page has 167,000 followers last time I looked, and various groups on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and so on.
That's fabulous. So before we look at the art, can you tell me a little bit about how you discovered you were autistic as an adult, didn't you? Or
yeah, I mean, I was first assessed for autism at the age of 4, except that was back in 1989. So the movie Rain Man had only been out a year back then. So basically because I didn't have very complex learning disabilities, I could talk, I could go to the toilet by myself and so on. Despite having all of these autism traits that we know and understand to be autism traits today, back then I didn't have the learning difficulties aspect side of it. So it wasn't until 2011 that a consultant psychiatrist finally told me, oh yeah, sorry Chris, you've been autistic your whole life and we didn't know.
Yeah.
I was 24. I was 24 when I found out, 25 when I got diagnosed.
Yeah. What was that? And what was that like?
Overall, a very good thing. Bear in mind that when I got diagnosed, I was in quite a negative place in my life anyway. So I had this thing to blame all of the bad things in my life on. So even though ordinarily about 9 times out of 10, that's not a statistic, it's just a saying, but 9 times out of 10, when someone finds out they're autistic, their reaction is, oh, that explains everything. Yeah. And to an extent, it was like that for me, but in my particular case, it took a little bit more time to make peace with it. But again, speaking as someone who is where I am now, doing what I'm doing now, I am slightly glad that someone told me.
Yes.
And that's what to tell parents of autistic children. Please tell your children they're diagnosed, because I think the sooner they find out that there is a reason why they're different to other people, then the sooner they can make peace with their autistic identity, rather than feeling as a friend of mine puts it, neurodivergent guilt of being different to other people, but not having an explanation as to why. You do occasionally hear the argument of, oh, well, I don't want to tell my child they're autistic. It might make them think they're different. Well, newsflash, your child already knows that they're different. Give them a word for it. A word that you can apply to positive situations, positive aspects about their life, rather than just the negatives.
Right. Yeah. 2 of my household got diagnosed just in the last year. And my husband, who is 41, turning 42 in 2 days, but I was the first one that noticed it last year. A friend of mine's daughter got diagnosed, and she was talking about her and her characteristics. And I was like, oh, I was like, this sounds really familiar. And then suddenly I started looking it up, and I told my husband, I was like, do you think you might be autistic? And he was like, I never thought about it. And then the next day he's like, yeah, I am 100%. And it was like, suddenly the clouds parted, and everything about him from the last 20 years of marriage made total sense. It was like, oh, okay, we get it now.
Oh, congratulations to him on the recent diagnosis.
Yeah. And then we saw it in him, and then we started to see it in one of our children, and we were like, oh, okay. And so they both got diagnosed. And yeah, I love that. He said that to her when we told her. He was like, congratulations, you're autistic. It was
yes.
So awesome. So yeah, I did that. It is a very common household conversation these days in our house, since it's so very new. So, okay, let's get to the art, and then I'm sure we'll get into a lot of topics about autism and, of course, your work as an author as well. Would like to hear about that. So, let's get to the art first.
I do go off on a lot of tangents, so yes.
Oh, no, that's
pretty sure
perfectly fine. I do too. I am recently diagnosed with ADHD, and I am having a really hard time not talking about your Minecraft poster. So
that's
because that's one of my special interests. Okay.
Oh, brilliant!
And I was like, I think I might see a top of a creeper. So anyway, that's what I'm focused on right now in my life, in my free time, playing Minecraft. All right, I'm going to show you the art. So and I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to tell you the titles, but don't spend too much time thinking about the titles. We really like to focus on the image. But I'm telling the titles so that the people listening can know what we're talking about. And then pick one, just whatever just feels like the right one, the one that intrigues you, just whatever one draws you in. And I can also show them to you again as well if you want to look at them.
Okay.
All right. And then all of these artworks are from autistic artists, except for one. She is ADHD and dissociative identity disorder, but I feel like the kind of themes of neurodiversity are present. So I figured we could include her work as well. But the other three artists are all autistic. Okay, so our first artwork is called Mask of Decay by Mitch Christian.
And it's quite striking.
Yeah, it really is. I love the colors in it. This one didn't have a title, but the artist is Geoffa Fells. And I might be mispronouncing her name. Could be Jeffa. This one is called Expand by Prue Stevenson. And this one has a video component too, because it's not the final product, it's the creation of it. That's the artwork. It's more performance art. And then we have Masking by Nihil Ivan. It's one word. Any of them really drawing you in?
Yeah, all of them. But I'm noticing the common theme, obviously, between the first and the fourth. I'm going to guess that each of those artists is autistic. Yes. But then again, masking is not exclusive to autistic people, of course. It's quite common across neurodivergence in general. But the amount that we discuss masking in autistic communities and the sheer impact that masking can have on a person. And so, yeah, I've been there, done that. It sucks. And yeah.
Indeed. So, yeah, you're exactly right. Those two are. And, it was really fascinating trying to find a work of art because I spent hours doing this, but I was like, I wanted it to be an autistic artist, but, you don't have to, as an autistic artist, make art about autism. You can make art about whatever you want. So a lot of the art was just about other things. And I was like, well, that's brilliant and beautiful. But I was like, but I want it to be, a topic of conversation for us. So that I was finding an autistic artist work about autism was a little bit harder. So many amazing artists. Tell us your tangent.
Yes, it's what I just said about autistic artists don't just have to do art about autism, and it got me on this long train of thought about how we're often such creative people, but at the same time, kind of, and this is the case with minority groups in general, expected to stick to our part of the playing field. So like comedians are supposed to tell jokes about race, for example, or female comedians are supposed to tell jokes about being women, for example. And I think it's really important that we do, those of us who are autistic artists, do art about just whatever the hell we want.
Yeah.
And the event I was thinking about was, and this is where the tangent comes in. I was selling books a little while ago at an event that had absolutely nothing to do with autism. It's pretty rare, actually, but most of my book sales come from autism-specific events or speaking engagements. But I was at this event which had nothing to do with autism. And someone came up, and I was selling copies of Underdogs, and I should probably, just for context, say what Underdogs is. It's a novel series where the whole of Britain has been imprisoned in these giant walled cities, and there are only They're under the guard of like a million-ish cloned soldiers as well, and there are only 13 people who remain free in the abandoned countryside, trying to fight back and free the British population. So yeah, 13 against a million, and you can see why it's called underdogs. But also, it's also called underdogs because 8 out of those 13 people are teenagers who escaped an attack on their special school. So you've got autistic heroes and dyslexic heroes and heroes of ADHD and Down syndrome and PDA and anxiety and so on. And anyway, so I was saying with copies of this book, and this guy comes up to me and says, "Oh, so what's this book about?" And I tell him, well, pretty much word for word, exactly the same as I just mentioned now. And he nodded, interested, and said, "Is this for charity?"
Oh.
And I was like, well, no, it's not. And that got me thinking, and it kept swirling around my head to an extent. It's still swirling around my head. The fact that inside neurodivergent circles is, oh yeah, there's a book series with autistic characters. These people might be characters who actually speak to me. I can actually relate to fictional characters for once. But outside of our corner of the playing field, it's, oh, this must be, I'm going to make the assumption this is for charity, because there can't really be any other reason that there'd be lots of different neurodivergent heroes in the same book. I mean, yeah, you can publish a book with an autistic character. Like, look at us, we're doing an inclusion. Look, maybe you can have a dyslexic side character and so on. But a lot of them, that must be a philanthropic, charitable effort. Like, no, it's actually my income as an author. I just wrote this series because I thought it would be awesome.
Wow, that's great. That's wild. That I can't even. I mean, yeah. I believe that happened, but I'm just like, oh, wow. Yeah, that would make me, I think I'm going to keep thinking about that too. Like, that's just one of those, it's like, wow.
Yeah, just occasionally. I mean, I learned a lot of diplomacy through having been a teacher.
Yeah.
I managed to, and also, I know that when people say things like that, it's not because they're monsters or that they're terrible ableist people. It's some people are just honestly misguided. In fact, I think about my understanding of autism before I learned I was autistic. I just believed what people told me about autism, about, oh, yeah, they struggle with empathy and they don't get sarcasm and all these other things. And as cringeworthy as it is, I don't blame myself for it, because you can only be as informed as far as you have been informed. So I try not to alienate people too much when giving some insight or guidance about this kind of topic. And
that's where your work from like Autistic Not Weird is so important, is that it's educating, like making those small little moments of education. So
we're in danger of going off on, I'm in danger of going off on another tangent about the importance of not treating people like complete monsters when they say, when they use person first language, for example. I am not a person with autism. It is not a disease. I'm an autistic person. And I'm also not a person with left-handedness, because I don't believe that my left-handedness is so awful that it needs to be pushed to the back of the sentence. Like, it's not really a part of me, really. And but as with most other people, I was educated into saying people with autism, because it's apparently more respectful that way.
Yeah.
It's more respectful to those who decide what respectful means to but I should say, yes, there are a substantial minority of people who prefer themselves to be called people with autism. But according to a survey that I ran, 11,500 people responded to that survey. The results are on autisticnotweird.com. The vast majority of autistic people prefer to be called autistic people. But the amount, if you run a Facebook page where someone says, "Please help me, my son with autism is struggling with anxiety," and that thread gets 100 comments, the more comments that thread gets, the more likely you are to get one person saying, "No, don't do that. He's your autistic child." And fair enough, teaching about language is important. I don't want to say, "Oh, we shouldn't be telling people about the importance of identity first language," because we should. But honestly, time and a place, and also
they need help. That mom is. Yeah.
I mean, I would say my personal response to that would be, well, if they asked a question about their child's anxiety, that must be the focal point of any answer. Yeah. You could slip a thing out there, but, oh yeah, by the way, and then talk about identity first language. But I do cringe a lot when I see comments from people who honestly believe they're doing the right thing by basically yelling at someone for using the wrong language preferences when they were really asking for help with something that their child is struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happened yesterday on my
Right.
Facebook post because I was looking for people to
Oh, I saw
suggest.
that. Yes.
Yeah, I was looking for people to suggest autistic artists to me, and it was great because like half of these I think came from those suggestions. But yeah, there was one person that was like, "You mean person with autism?" And I'm like, "No, I actually don't mean that." And then there was another person that there's in my field too, in art, there's always someone just waiting for you to just potentially mess up with something. And then like there were people that were like, "Oh, why?" That mine is like why are you interpreting art? Why are you not just listening to what the artist said about the art? I get that. That's the one I get a lot. And yeah, they're just like, "Oh, I can't wait to just catch you making a mistake." And I felt that vibe so strongly from those people in that post. But
Honestly, that is an interesting discussion about if someone makes a piece of art, to what extent are we supposed to interpret it how they meant it, and to what extent are we supposed to interpret it ourselves? And I'm not an artist, so I have no idea about what the answer to that is, but it's an interesting discussion.
yeah, it's the one I have a lot, and I have very strong opinions on. But there are other people who have very strong opinions on it too that are not mine. And I'm like, and every time I'm like, I understand what you mean, but I just disagree. And my whole livelihood for the last whole career of my life has been around the fact that we can interpret art and we can get value from it. So, all that said, which artwork do you want to talk about? We got Mask of Decay, Mitch Christian, the one by Giaffa Fels, Expand by Prue Stevenson, and Masking by Nihil Ivan.
Hmm. I've got to choose one of the masking ones simply because I know what conversations
Yeah.
go come out of it. There's also, in terms of which style of art I think I like the most, that would be the second one. But the one that I'd like to talk about is the first.
Okay. I love this one. I'm glad you chose it.
Mm.
And when I come into these and when I pick the art, I don't spend any time in trying to interpret it for myself because I want it to be just kind of for me to be able to find, experience the interpretation live with you. So tell me, what is first grabbing your attention? What made you want to choose this one?
I think, you said at the beginning, I'm going to choose this one where we're not for knowing what the title is.
Yeah.
And often there's an example somewhere in my head, but I can't remember for the life of me what it is. I think it was a photograph that I saw once, but it'll probably come to me either during this conversation or tomorrow at some point while I'm reflecting on this conversation. But there's a piece of artwork, I think it might be in a photo that I looked at, and it was fairly, decent, average. But then I saw the title, applied the title to picture, and I thought, bloody hell, this is incredible. Now you know the context behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish for the life of me that I could remember which piece of art I'm even talking about. But it really does say something about the importance of choosing a good title.
Yeah.
So, now I know from context of this about masking. This I'm assuming is a pictorial representation of what the masking experience feels like in the mind of this autistic person who is basically being coerced into not being the person who they authentically are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one thing we do before we kind of really start to interpret, the elements of the painting is to describe it for the listeners. They're able to see the picture in the show notes and things. So listeners, you can go to the show notes and find this image, or you can also watch this on YouTube that will have the picture big. So can you describe what you see, and then I'll fill in anything that I also notice.
What I'm seeing is a twisted shape that kind of sort of looks like a head, but not quite, with a very noticeable twist in the middle of it. You can certainly see an eye at the top of it. You can see what's things that look like there may be facial features, but essentially it's a long, twisted, vertical object that's extremely colourful, by the way, extremely vibrant with all these mixed colours. And very visually striking.
Yeah, and it looks to be done in maybe watercolor or something, but the colors are really vibrant.
Oh, yeah, she probably mentioned that.
Yeah, there's areas where it's kind of pale and areas where it's bolder. And it has there's a lot of like strong black outlines. Really hard to describe work of art. So definitely go look at the picture if you're listening, because this
not
one
gonna
is
lie, I was kind of hoping that you described this rather than me.
I always like to give it to you first, and I'm like, I'll fill in the blanks.
Fair enough. Yeah, that was a good point about the very thick black lines as well. As difficult as the shape is to interpret it, you know exactly what the shape is because the outlines are so pronounced.
Yeah, it does. It's like you just, even if you didn't know like the whole mask thing, you're like, yes, this is representing a figure. This is a person. You can definitely tell that, but very abstracted, twisted. The proportions are all wonky. Like all of that is there. Okay, so what part of it is really drawing your attention, or would you like to kind of describe that? Well, yeah. How about, will you describe what masking is? I'm sure a lot of people listening know this, but just in case they don't.
Okay, so but basically, from a very early age, we're taught that difference equals wrong, and so you have to fit in with the whole crowd in order to not be judged by the crowd. And if you're autistic, there can be a hell of a lot to mask. And this can be masking it in the form of hiding certain personality traits. It could be hiding your stims, like for me, I like to flick my fingers because it helps me to focus, or it helps me to do like manage the physical elements of anxiety. The stepdaughter does exactly the same thing, but to express excitement. But you get judged if you do that by non-autistic people who, ironically, also stim parts of their body by like tapping their foot or sighing or things like that. I once heard very cynically, it's only called stimming if an autistic person does it. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that you've got to put a stop to in order to not be judged by other people. The things you do with your body to express joy or to deal with anxiety and things. It can also be in the form of basically pretending to be a different person and mimicking neurotypical traits and invariably doing it wrongly, because that's the thing with autistic people. We're often so authentic in who we are that if we try to be someone else, it's very noticeable that, wait, something's odd about the way they're doing that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's essentially getting rid I say masking, that is literally the word we're talking about, but concealing certain parts of yourself or your preferences or your mannerisms or your habits in order, I'd say, for the approval of other people. I'm not even sure it's for other people's approval. It's simply to not get judged by people.
Mm-hmm. And what does it feel like when you're masking?
In my personal experience, everything you do is automatically wrong by default, but you keep doing it anyway because you think the alternative is worse. And it really sucks.
Yeah.
And one of the best things I ever did was start talking openly about being autistic, because that ended up with me leading to meet other people who are also autistic. And yeah, it'll come as no surprise to you that in the majority of cases, autistic people really don't feel the need to mask in front of other autistic people. So, and that's the kind of person I try to be now. I try to be the kind of person that other people, autistic or otherwise, but obviously majority autistic because it applies disproportionately to us. I try and be the kind of person that other people don't need to mask in front of.
Mm-hmm.
I do get quite a few positive comments about that. Like if I'm meeting a family with an autistic child, a lot of the time at the end, the parents will say, "Wow, that my son's never connected with someone as quickly as with you. Why is that?" And yeah, a big part of it may be because, well, yes, I'm autistic and we just kind of recognize the mannerisms each. It's just so easy to communicate with other autistic people for a lot of us. But I think that's only part of it. I think the other part of it is that having masked a lot in the past as an adult, I've now managed to escape all of that. And I try to be the person that other people can afford to be their authentic selves in front of, because I think authenticity is both enormously important and also a vastly underrated quality of autistic people, and something that we absolutely cannot afford to scare out of them by forcing them to mask.
Yeah, I had never thought about that most autistic people are so incredibly authentic.
It's an underrated quality.
It really is. I mean, I had not thought about that. And it was interesting with my husband before we knew he was autistic. Like, I would always get so confused about how he was at home versus how he was in social situations. Like, his voice was different. He moved his body different. And I was like, I was like, I could never figure out what was happening. Like, and I know everybody has like their social persona and their like home persona, but his was so strikingly different, and that I couldn't I could never figure out what it was. I thought it was maybe he was just shy, and he is. But yeah, once I realized he was masking, I'm like, oh yes. And you, like you said, he's like, autistic people aren't necessarily good at it because they're, they are authentic in their natural state, and so it's hard.
We do it. We feel like we have to.
Yeah.
Things happen if you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
I can't continue this conversation without quoting Judy Garland, as I do a lot, because it's an amazing quote. Judy Garland, excuse me, being the actress who played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, who was quoted as saying, "It's better to be a first-rate version of yourself than a second-rate version of someone else." And that's enormously valuable, because all too often autistic people are encouraged to believe that the opposite is true. Never mind being the person you actually are, because, well, how's that working out for you? It's better to try and pretend to be other people. You won't quite get it right, but it's better to be that second-rate version of your neurotypical than an autistic person. But no, these days I'm happier than I've ever been in my life since childhood, and it's because I get to be authentic, and I am that first-rate version of myself, rather than me in my 20s who was doing a very bad job of being a second-rate version of another person.
Yeah. It makes me think of, do you ever follow the work of Gabor Mate?
Don't, I'm afraid.
He writes a lot about ADHD, but he writes and talks about how like two of our like evolutionary needs are, one is to belong, and then the other need is to be authentic. And like you need both of those things to survive. And so you need to belong because you need to, you need someone to feed you. But then like you also need to be authentic because you need to learn to be able to follow your gut instincts, and you need to be able to, there's a lot of things you like, you're happier, but like you need that to survive. But then, in our world, that the need to belong is now directly clashing with the need to be authentic. And so usually the need to belong wins because it's survival instinct. You have to eat. You have to be part of a group.
And you have to stay with the herd.
Yeah. Yeah. And then now we have all these people that have stifled their basic, need to express themselves their entire lives, and they're becoming adults, and they're just like something's wrong and they don't know what's wrong. And it's because they're hiding who they really are underneath it all.
And the world is losing out as a result.
Indeed. Yes. So tell me where you see this masking and how it feels to mask in the artwork.
I suppose the biggest clue is the fact that it's nearly but not quite a face. As in, I'm seeing in parallels with when you're masking, you're nearly but not quite a person, or your person, your version of yourself. In fact, is it just me? I think I've just noticed something right at the bottom. I think that person's got hair. So I'm now seeing this a bit differently. Up until now, I'd seen it as some twisted shape of a head. But now I'm seeing it as, assuming that I'm right in that is hair, the bottom half bit just below that twisted bit is the person's physical head. And then everything above the twisted bit is the mask that they're putting on. So I'm now no longer seeing this as a twisted version of a head. I'm seeing it as a head with a mask growing out of it.
Yeah, I have been looking at this hair too, trying to figure it out. Yeah, if that's and then there's this jaggedy like yellow that could be also like a hairline.
That's literally what I'm thinking is their hair.
You were, because I was seeing these little black. Yeah, so it's like the mask is growing up, twisted out.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's funny because I'm now picturing the artist listening to this, and the artist could be thinking, well, duh, you only just saw the hair. Or the artist could be thinking, oh, well, yeah, we get it. Because occasionally someone reads Underdogs and points something out that I actually had not worked out. Like, one of my characters is gay, and I have no idea until people pointed it out. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I had a funny conversation. I've told it on the podcast before, but I had a funny conversation with an artist on the streets of New Orleans. He was selling his art, and he had painted a bunch of frogs, and it was a delightful painting of a bunch of frogs. And he was like, yeah, it's a bunch of frogs. And then someone came through and was like, that's an orgy. And then and now he can't not see it. And so now that's what he calls it, and I was like, that is amazing that like, the viewer co-created what the artwork is about with you. Like you created it, and then something else different happened from it. And that's what's magical, I think, about this podcast. It is Like sometimes I'm like, I know that the artist included this and it was an accident, like, or they just did it because they needed to balance out the colors, or they need, it was just purely like a visual addition that they did to make it look more balanced. And then we're like, putting all this deep meaning on it. But I think that's just really, yeah, I love that because it shows the importance of the reader, the viewer as part of the creation of the meaning. It's fun. So did you, I know yours is a series, did you then make your character gay after you learned from the reader?
No, but by then, well, he's not overtly gay in the series. Well, obviously, because I had no idea. But okay, I'll tell you the slightly more complex version. Basically, he's a 14-year-old ginger assassin named Oliver Roth. And yeah, I did not write him as a gay character. But when people start reading it, a whole class of secondary school students told their teacher, and the teacher then told me. And when I passed it on to other people, that they've said, "Oh yeah, I thought that." But basically, it's because of the connection he has with the underdogs, specifically with the main character, which I never intended as being any kind of attraction. They're literally trying to kill each other. They're actually trying to shoot each other in the heads. It's not a traditional romantic relationship here. But my conclusion is that, because, try not to go into loads of backstory here, but this young lad was basically adopted into this private defense contractor, made to live inside this citadel, which one day became New London Prison. And he's the only teenager there. And he's there working as an assassin. And so my conclusion is that Oliver Roth has no idea what his sexuality is, because he's not been able to explore it in the way that teenagers do explore. And so there's not only does he not have any people his own age around him, the only people he does have around him are adult colleagues. Yeah. Nobody whom he would have the kind of relationship with who he could actually talk about these things. So there's a lot of stuff rolling around in this lad's head that he is pushing to what side, or just does not want to address, because he doesn't want to understand them. He doesn't like things he doesn't understand, so he just like brushes them to one side. And yeah, I think he probably is gay, but he has not only no idea, but no way of finding out, because, well, he can't learn these things about himself. Mm-hmm. But again, I had no idea about this. I just wrote it. I'm, full disclosure, I'm asexual myself, so I really only put in characters' sexualities or orientations in my books if there is some kind of storyline related purpose for it, like
right. There's a romantic connection or whatever.
Yeah, like Ewan, the main character, he is straight because he needs to be, because, won't give any spoilers, but because of a heterosexual relationship he ends up in, which is a major part of the story. But if that weren't part of the story, it probably just wouldn't have indicated sexuality one way or the other.
Yeah. And I do see potential for fan fiction, though, for Oliver. Someone comes and tells his story about when he grows up and discovers it. That's good fan fiction.
But funny thing, actually, I started my writing journey by writing Sonic stories for my younger cousin when I was about 12, 13 years old. He was considerably younger. We were both Sonic fans. And yeah, that's so I'm a huge advocate for fan fiction, because that's how I started. And so now I actually write and publish action stories that do have some common traits with the Sonic stories that I wrote as a teenager. But
I love that.
Anyway, one of the most beautiful moments of my authoring career so far was when I teach some creative writing classes to a group of autistic teenagers, and some of them write fan fiction on this website called Archive of Our Own. I'd never heard of it before, so I looked it up. I found Underdogs fan fiction.
Oh yes,
it's gone full circle, and there's people writing fan fiction, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, I love that.
No one has yet written any sexually charged Underdogs fan fiction yet, and
that you've read.
Oh yeah, that
they might have.
Yeah, maybe written in a personal journal or something somewhere, like the Ewan Weston Oliver Roth / fan fiction. Oh dear.
I love that. Oh, because that really does. It's like and that's the creative process. Is you have to start with references that you know and references you're interested in, and then you start to make connections, and it's all, and then once you release your book into your work into the world. I'm writing a book currently, and so I've been thinking about this a lot. But like, once you release that into the world, like, stuff happens. One line that someone says is going to trigger something in some person that they're not going to realize. And then it's just going to create a whole different path for that one person because they read, it's brilliant, the impact of art and books.
Oh, yeah. One thing that's kind of frightening, and so, again, a bit of a tangent. One bit that's frightening about being a teacher, in my experience, is that, in a good way, I guess. But if you're a half decent teacher, it is. But basically, you never truly get to understand how much impact you've had on various people. Like, for every one student who comes back and says, "Oh, you helped me to do this. This is really helpful," there'll be another 10 who you helped, and for you know, they could be telling stories about how this teacher helped them that one time, but you'll have no idea. I'm thinking of Year 4 teacher, Mrs. Dishington. I was thinking about it just a few days ago and how much of a great teacher she was. But she moved down to the South Coast in 1995, and so I don't even know if she's still alive anymore. But yeah, she has if she is alive, she's got no idea that I'm talking about her right now. So it makes me wonder. And this is both in terms of teaching and in terms of arts and writing and stuff in general. I mean, bloody hell, I've got 167,000 Facebook followers. I have absolutely no idea what kind of impact I may or may not be having, and it's really frightening.
Yeah.
But there's opportunity there. And that's why I described it as the good kind of frightening, because if you do have faith that the influence that you have over other people is actually positive, then that's
it's like frightening, but it's like sublime. The concept of the sublime, which is just like it's like when you see a beautiful mountain, it's like you realize your place in the world, and like you realize the vastness of the world, and it's like that feeling of awe. And I feel that too because of my work with teachers. I think, okay, so I sold this lesson. I sold, 2,000 copies of this lesson. And I was like, okay, each of those were an art teacher. All of them at least had 100 students per year. It's like, okay, 12 or whatever, what thousand did I say? 2,000 times 100. And then I'm like, okay, then they had students the next year. And then, so then I start doing the math. And then I just all of a sudden like get completely overwhelmed. And it's the same. It's like a frightening feeling, but it's also just like it's like a feeling of just like bliss at the same time. So.
In a lovely comfort zone of being very frightened of something big.
Yes. I love that feeling. It's so good. Okay, let's bring it back to the art, because I always wanted to make sure we're kind of coming back in. So now that we've realized this is this potential at the bottom is the hair, and then the face mask is kind of coming off of that. Like, how can you connect the way this looks with how it feels to mask?
Well, bit of a disclaimer. I know how I'm interpreting this art. I have no idea whether the artist actually interprets it, until this goes right back into the conversation that we started earlier about how the artist may think, yep, that was actually what I intended. Or might be thinking, what on earth are you thinking, Chris? Or, I haven't seen it that way. But that goes back into everything that we just talked about. So the way I see this personally, the lower half is the person's physical head, and the top half, after this like twisted thing in the middle, is the mask that they are presenting to other people. It does not look like what one would recognize as a human face, because from the autistic perspective, masked personalities don't correlate with how we see ourselves as people either. I could also perhaps go further and say that perhaps this person is masking as badly as I used to. The fact that, that's top half clearly does not look like a face, and anyone looking on and listening to this person or watching this person will think, there's something wrong with that face there. Exactly the same as we were talking about earlier. So not only is that a mask that we're seeing in the top half of the picture, it's a very bad impression of a real face. Now, I may be projecting my own experiences onto someone else's artwork here. But
yes, that's exactly what we're doing. And that's kind of a preface for the whole podcast is, yes, our interpretation, or how you feel and how you interpret it, is your meaning. the artist meaning is still there. And so we're not assuming that our meaning and the artist meaning are the same. So we're not, I'm not at the end of this. We're like, this artist, this art is about this because of all the things we talked about. Like, no, this is what we think. And then what the artist thinks, they're two separate things. So yes. I wonder, so when I'm looking at this, or what you were talking about, you said masking as bad as you used to. I also think that there's probably, of course, everybody's version of masking is going to feel different, to that person. So like your version of masking and my husband's version of masking and my daughter's version of masking, they're all different. But I imagine that some people are going to, like, there is maybe a lot more shame for some people than other people, like because of their upbringing or their traumas or different things. And like,
oh yes, there's that.
Yeah. So there's like in when I'm looking at this, and I think because I'm looking at it through my perspective, of my version of masking, I used to have a lot of sort of sadness and stuff about my past and sort of the anxiety. And so when I'm looking at this, I like see that sort of the twistingness of it, and all of the colors that are kind of melding together that kind of maybe don't necessarily go together. Like, I just see so much pain in it. Shame and confusion, and shame is my big one. I just keep looking at this, and like, that's the only word that keeps popping in my head, is shame. And then I look at the the masked part, which is on that left, I guess I can show you right here, this part right here, and I'm looking at, like, this to me looks almost like a tear. So I always project my sadness into any, my former sadness into any artwork, but that's kind of what I'm seeing too. And then the wateriness of the watercolor kind of makes me think of like the fluidity of those emotions as well. So yeah, like, I'm wondering, did you, okay, go ahead. I'm rambling at this point.
I was it reminded me a lot in what you just said there about the shame associated with masking, because I'm thinking of two things really. Number one, if an autistic person is taught that masking your autistic identity is a good thing because it'll help you to make friends and things, it directly teaches them to be ashamed of being autistic. Mm-hmm. And it's not just neurodivergent masking either. I mean, a bit of context. I am very much a Jesus-loving Christian, and I have some very strong opinions about radical acceptance of everyone without exception, no questions asked. I used to go to a church that attended Pride every year because of our Christian duty to stand up for the marginalised. And I've had plenty of discussions with non-religious LGBTQ plus people, and always feeling the need to apologise for the upbringing that they had in environments that were not really just I don't know. Is it wrong for me to call them anti-Jesus, even though they were like Christian areas that preached the love of Jesus, but at the same time, can you just try not being gay?
Yeah.
No. In my opinion, actual real life Jesus would definitely have preferred hanging around the neurodivergent LGBT plus outcast crowd than the people that, again, try not to say without sounding too judgmental, but frankly, yes, I'm thinking of the right wing of the Christian worship community. I cannot fathom how you can be Christian and right wing at the same time. It just makes absolutely no sense to me. But I do talk to a lot of people who do feel that's leftover shame. Leaving aside the fact that they grew up believing they weren't good enough for God, that's an utterly devastating thing to inflict upon a person, especially when in my personal belief regarding Jesus, it's not even true.
Yeah.
But the shame, like you said, that comes from that, even when you find acceptance in a crowd of autistic people or a crowd of LGBT plus people, or like in the church I used to go to, a bunch of other Christians who are committed to actually following Jesus' words about not judging people. Once you've found that sense of belonging, it feels so good, but there's some shame left over.
Yeah. And there's that whole concept of and that whole concept of like hate the sin, love the sinner, but it's still it's still like, well, No, I mean you can't like I'm not saying I'm autistic, but like yeah, you can't just like the
Mm,
person first language. Like you can't take the autism out of a person. They are like you can't.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think.
my favourite bit of a tangent, but my favourite counter argument to the whole "oh well, hate the sin, love the sinner" is when the person says back to them, "That's okay. I will hate the belief, but love the believer." And when the person hears that and thinks, what do you mean you hate my? They suddenly feel the same sense of, hang on, you don't actually like me, that a non-religious LGBT plus person might at hearing hate the sin, love the sinner.
Oh, I love
But
that.
yeah,
That's
well,
good.
I'm very much coming at this from an acceptance point of view. Downstairs is sat my very happy stepdaughter, autistic stepdaughter, who hasn't attended church since she was around 7 or 8 years old because her mother was asked if she could, just make your daughter stop stimming and flapping her hands everywhere. It's distracting the congregation, distracting the important members of the congregation. So yeah, they haven't been back to church since, and yeah, missed out on a lot there. But also.
Yeah.
When you do that to a person, how do they step into the next church? When you become the place that rejects an autistic person or rejects an LGBTQ plus person or rejects anyone of any kind of minority group, you don't just take away opportunities from them. You make it more difficult for them to access the next opportunity.
Mm-hmm. You know what it made me think of too, as you were talking, was you were saying, well, Jesus absolutely would be hanging out with the LGBTQ crowd, and they always say, God made man in his image or whatever. Like, of course, Jesus would want you to be who you were made to be. Like, he would want you to be how you are. I think that like authenticity. I mean, I'm projecting onto Jesus here, but I feel like authenticity is a top value.
Jesus was very, very notoriously authentic in who he was and what he believed.
Yeah.
But in what you were saying there, yeah, that church mentioned that went to Pride. We also met in a pub for quite a while. Yeah, one of our vicars has recently become Britain's first fully ordained non-binary priest. And they have a lot of insights and opinions about God creating people to be their authentic self. In fact, give me a split second. I'm going to go to my Facebook profile because I shared a quote from them after the news story came out because they were on. Yeah, here we go. ITV's this morning, and right at the end when they were asked, "Is there anything that you want to finish by saying?" They said, "We are called to stand before God as an authentic version of who we were created to be. And that is a lifelong journey for everybody, not just people struggling with their sexuality or gender." And I'm pretty sure earlier on, when I said that getting rid of the shame is a lifelong journey, I was thinking of bingo as I said that. I was thinking of what they said during that interview and how, yeah, things like that can be lifelong journeys for better or for worse.
Yeah, definitely. That's beautiful. I will look for that post or video, and I'll link to that into the show notes too. So if anybody wants to
I will
watch
post it into the Zoom chat right now.
That would be fabulous. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so we are coming up on an hour, and I don't want us to go too terribly long. But what is left in the artwork that you want to talk about, that you're noticing, that's drawing you?
Something I noticed about 10 minutes ago. That I'm placing a lot of mental bookmarks in conversations because two neurodivergent people in conversation can cover such a wide range of things. It does not surprise me in the least bit that we have talked about so many different things that are on the surface totally unconnected to what we were originally supposed to talk about. But as a result, I've placed a lot of mental bookmarks and things I might want to refer back to. Good. And something I noticed about 10 minutes ago before we started talking about non-binary priests and shame and all of that.
It's all related to me. I don't know what you're talking about that they're changes. It makes complete sense.
Yes, it makes sense if you view it as a giant web rather than a linear conversation.
Indeed.
But yeah, the thing I noticed was that look at how detailed and vibrant the mask is. And, actually, look how bright the mask is. Now look how dark the head is at the bottom.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm trying to put into words what I'm interpreting from that. But and also how unshapen that head is. It just looks like a blob in the approximate shape of a head without particularly black colours on it. So that is clearly not meant to be the thing that is standing out about that person. It is the mask that stands out. It's the bit at the top that's supposed to be what people interpret as the representation of that person, and the real actual head that they actually have is pushed down and doesn't really seem to matter, or doesn't have the appearance of mattering as much.
That is such a good observation, that like the dark versus the light. It also is in that, if we were to compare them again too, is the mask seems very kind of almost clown-like, and but also like it doesn't have like the complexity that the rest of it has in the level of detail and the different colors. Like it is much more sort of simple, whereas like there's so much more happening. And now too, the more I look at this head, it's like it looks like one of those heat maps, that shows like the temperatures of the person, because it's like the reds and the blues, and it makes me think like there's a lot happening there in like that depth and complexity that we don't see in that sort of bright face that you're trying to project onto the world. Interesting. I love that. I love that comparison between the two. I'm wondering too about this area over here.
I've been trying to interpret that as well.
Me too. Like that. So we're talking about the top right, if you're listening. It's more detailed. It's more patterned. And it almost looks like a profile of a face in a way. Like this almost looks like an eye. It was almost like I see another face.
Now you mention it, yeah, that's another eye. I'm thinking there's a mouth there, even though there's quite clearly a mouth on the very, very far left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because look, this could be the teeth.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted that.
So maybe this is the
inverted commas, but
yeah, maybe this is the real face, and then this is the mask. Like this is the actual face with the mask on it.
I don't know. In my head, it's still the bottom with the hair and the approximate head shape. To me, that is still the head. And then the twisty bit is the kind of airlock, for lack of a better word, between the real actual head and the mask. Or the transformation tunnel between the real person and the mask.
Yeah. Because I almost can kind of imagine, like, if I put myself in here and that's my head, like, if I could I'm going to take my glasses off to do this, so I'm going to try to tell you, the listeners, what I'm doing. But I'm like, because I could grab my face and, like, pull it out like taffy. Like I almost feel like, because you've got the lines there. So like maybe that's like the taffy and then twisted up around and it's interesting, it gets bigger. Like the mask is bigger than the head.
There can be multiple reasons for that. Either because, well, as a piece of art, the mask is the main thing about the piece of art, so it needs to be bigger. Right. But also, I'm probably interpreting it too deeply by saying that, well, if you're going to mask, make sure the mask is so big that they can't see what your real face, what your real head looks like.
Yeah. And it's interesting too how big the eyes are. Go ahead.
Someone else having a discussion with it about this about a week or so ago, about how I remembered it. It was at a conference in Northern Ireland I was speaking at, and how when we think of masking, we often think of it in terms of hiding behaviours. In fact, when you asked me to define masking earlier, that's exactly what I told you it was about. One thing that's rarely answers the discussion, rarely gets realised. I've only just remembered it's a thing now. Is that sometimes masking can be overacting, kind of like there were children in my class when I was at school who were the class clowns, as they were known. And looking back, it was quite obvious that they weren't very strong in an academic way, but they did not want other people to know how much they struggle with reading or writing or mathematics. So they started acting up. And they were the loudest people in the class and the most disruptive people in the class. But I'm coming to see that as a form of masking, because they were trying to conceal something that was authentic about them.
Yeah, it's like they learned that behavior gets them attention, the attention that they need. And then that attention shows them that they're belonging. So then they're like, okay, this behavior. So it's masking behaviors, but it's also like creating new behaviors of, these behaviors I get a reward from, and these behaviors I
originally meant it in a kind of concealing way, but now you mentioned that. there probably was elements of, well, no, I'm not going to get that sense of belonging from doing my maths and English and that, but might get that sense of belonging from being someone who's just openly against that element of school. Are there other people who feel like this, who can hang around and who aren't going to judge me for not knowing how to do this and the other?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, it often happens at such a young age that you can't really articulate why you're doing it.
Yeah. And then it takes your whole adulthood to like remove the layers of masking to figure out like why you are the way you are and what caused you that to be that way and who you actually are, because you don't know anymore. And then that's your whole journey. All right. Anything else left unsaid about the artwork? Any other mental bookmarks that you have placed that you are wanting to talk about?
I think we've run out. So I'm just also trying to work out. Remember ages ago when I said, it was an artwork or photo or a poem where if it didn't have that title, I wouldn't have understood what it was about. And I'm trying to remember what on earth that is.
Well, if you think of it, you can send me a message with it, and then I'll put it in the show notes and be like, he remembered. Here it is. And I do think this one, the title is very helpful and to guide your interpretation. And sometimes we need that guidance. Sometimes it can send you on directions that like limit the interpretation. If it gives you, if you think if it's clearly in your mind when you look at it, you're telling this whole story about it, and then you read the title and it's something completely different. It's like, oh, I'm wrong now. But this one, I think really the title does really help add that layer of meaning that helps you get to the interpretation quicker and see yourself in it more easily. Excellent. Well, if you think of that artwork or that photograph, send it to me. I'll add it to the show notes.
Yeah, it's really annoying, but at the same time, I'm glad that even though I don't remember specifically what it was, I still remember the lesson there. I still remember the impact it had. It's like that Maya Angelou quotes. People won't always remember what you said or even what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Yep.
And I've clearly just forgotten this piece of artwork or photo or poem or whatever it was, but I've remembered the impact that looking at the title and then the piece of art had.
Oh, and you remember how it made you feel? That connects all back to like the impact of reading your books and your art in the world. See, all of this is related. So, okay, can you tell us, and I'll put all these links in the show notes, but tell us where we can find you online so that if people want to follow your work, that they can do that.
Okay, well, on Facebook, my biggest page is Autistic, Not Weird. My author page is Chris Bonnello, Autistic Author. And I also have a Facebook page for Underdogs as well. I'm Autistic Not Weird on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Twitter as well. And Underdogs, the books themselves, are available basically everywhere where you can buy books online within reason. And you can see the first 3 chapters for free on chrisbonnello.com. And autisticnotweird.com is where all my articles and insights, and that survey that's mentioned earlier as well. That's and the only other thing to say is make sure you spell Bonnello right. It spells Bonnello, although I imagine it'll probably be in the description on the page that you're actually publishing this podcast to. So
yes, it will. Okay, so we'll find all those links. We'll put them in the show notes. And one question that's just for me is how for your books, what's your age recommendation?
Well, you know how The Hunger Games were written for teenagers, but it's largely adult. Well, not largely, but perhaps a slim majority of its readership were adults. It's kind of like that. When people ask me the age range, I generally say 12 plus, but I do mean 12 plus, I mean all the way up to old age. People hear 12 plus and think, oh, it must be for teenagers. Well, yeah, it was written for teenagers, but again, a majority of my readers are adults. And also, even then, 12 plus isn't very useful because I catch the occasional 10-year-old reading it.
Yeah, so that was why the question was for me, is because my autistic daughter is 10, she'll be 11 in a couple months, but she is an avid reader. Like she reads books after books after books. And I'm like, oh, she needs this one. So if you've heard of a 10-year-old reading it, I'm like, oh, I think I'll get her that book.
Oh, yes. If you can handle the violence in the Hunger Games, you can handle the violence in Underdogs, basically.
Yeah. She hasn't read Hunger Games yet, but she will get to it, I'm sure. But she's really stuck in all the Rick Riordan.
She loves it. It's an amazing trilogy.
Yeah. Oh, I do. Yeah, me too. I read it when I was like right after she was born. Like when I was like feeding her, I would sit there and read Hunger Games. I'm like, you need to read it. It's part of your legacy. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so very much for joining me today. I loved this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Art and Self. And if you loved what you heard, please consider leaving me a rating or a review on iTunes. And share this episode with one friend who you know needs to hear what we talked about today. You will find links to the artworks that we discussed over at the show notes at artandself.com. And you can also join my email list to get notified of all of the new upcoming episodes. The videos of these episodes are also available over on YouTube at Art and Self. And you can also follow me on social media, on Instagram at Art and Self and on Facebook at Art and Self Cindy. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time.